After my son passed away, I thought the hardest part would be learning how to live without him. But then I discovered something I never expected. He had left me everything. The house, 2 cars, and a bank account that was solely in my name. Now, most people would think I would rush to share that news with my daughter-in-law. After all, she was his wife. But something inside me told me to stay quiet, to hold this secret close to my chest. And thank heavens I did, because exactly 1 week later, she pulled something so outrageous, so revealing of her true character, that I nearly dropped to my knees in shock. Picture this. Me, sitting alone in my kitchen, still grieving, still trying to make sense of the silence in the house. And then, out of nowhere, she walks in with that look on her face. You know the kind. That smug smile that doesn't reach the eyes. And what she said to me next made my blood run cold. She had no idea about the will. She had no idea about what my son had planned, and she had no idea that the cards she was about to play would expose every selfish bone in her body. I promise you, if I had trusted her for even 1 second, if I had been naive enough to believe that she had my best interest at heart, I would have lost everything my son wanted me to have. Everything he worked for. Everything he left behind. And here is the thing. I could see the storm brewing even before she opened her mouth. The entitlement, the greed, the way she carried herself like she already owned it all. But the reality of what came out of her lips, that was something no amount of suspicion could have prepared me for. Stick with me, because this story isn't just about money. It's about betrayal, about masks slipping when people think they've already won. And trust me, when I say, by the end, you'll be thanking your lucky stars it wasn't your daughter-in-law who tried to pull this stunt. Had I trusted her? Had I shared the secret of what my son left behind? I would have lost everything, and she would have gotten away with it. But oh, karma has a way of stepping in, doesn't it? Losing a child is something no parent should ever have to endure. When my son passed, it felt like someone had ripped the floor out from under me. I still remember that morning. The phone call, the way my body went cold, the way my knees buckled as I sank into the chair in the hallway. He wasn't just my son. He was my companion, my protector, my reason to keep going after my husband had already left this world. And suddenly, just like that, he was gone. For days, I moved through life in a haze. I couldn't taste food. I couldn't sleep more than an hour at a time. I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking I heard his footsteps on the porch, or his car pulling into the driveway. But there was only silence. And in that silence, grief pressed down on me like a heavy blanket I couldn't shake off. Then came the meeting with the lawyer. I dreaded it. Not because of the money, not because of the will, but because it made everything feel final. I walked into that office clutching a tissue in my hand, my heart pounding as though I was about to hear the verdict of a trial I hadn't even prepared for. The lawyer, a kind man with gentle eyes, spoke softly. He said, "Margaret, your son thought about this carefully. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of." And then he laid it out, piece by piece. The house, the 2 cars, and a bank account, all left in my name. Not jointly, not shared, not in trust with his wife, solely in my name. I couldn't breathe for a moment. On one hand, I was stunned. I had expected him to leave everything to his wife, as most husbands do. On the other hand, I felt a strange wave of warmth, almost like he was still looking out for me. My son knew me. He knew how fragile I was without him, how easily people could take advantage of me. And in that office, I realized he had made a choice. He had trusted me, not her. But the guilt came fast. A heavy, gnawing guilt that made me question everything. Was I being cruel for keeping this to myself? Should I march straight to her house and tell her? She was, after all, his widow. Didn't she deserve something? Didn't she deserve to know? I sat there, twisting that tissue in my hands until it tore, and the lawyer must have read my mind. He leaned forward and said, "Margaret, I don't think your son's decision was made lightly. He must have had his reasons. This wasn't accidental. He made sure this was clear." Still, as I left the office that day, I carried two things in my heart: the unbearable loss of my child, and the unbearable secret of what he had left behind. When I got home, I sat in my living room and stared at the framed photo of him on the mantel. My daughter-in-law's face flashed in my mind, the way she had carried herself at the funeral, the way she barely looked at me, the way her words felt more like a performance for the people watching than true grief. Something in me whispered, "Not yet. Don't tell her yet." And that's when I made my decision. It wasn't out of spite, and it wasn't out of selfishness. It was out of instinct, an instinct that told me this was not the moment to share, that waiting, just waiting, might show me the truth I needed to see. Little did I know, that decision would save everything. Because within just 1 week, my daughter-in-law would prove to me, and to everyone else, exactly why my son made the choices he did. And the stunt she pulled? Well, let's just say it confirmed my every suspicion. In the days after the funeral, I expected grief. I expected quiet mornings, maybe some tears shared over coffee, maybe even moments where we could cling to each other in our sorrow. After all, she had lost her husband, just as I had lost my son. We could have been united in that pain. But instead, what I witnessed chilled me to the bone. The very night after the service, as people were still dropping off casseroles and cards, she started dropping hints. Not small, careful comments. No. Bold, confident statements, as though the ink on the death certificate had barely dried, and she was already drawing up plans. She sat at my kitchen table, sipping a glass of wine she had brought herself, and said, almost casually, "You know, once things settle, I'll probably put the house on the market. It's too big for just me." I remember my fingers tightening around my teacup. The house. My son had worked for every brick of that home, and there she was, claiming it like she had already signed the deed. The next day, while we were sorting through some of his clothes, she picked up his car keys and twirled them on her finger. "I'm definitely keeping the SUV. The other car I might sell. 2 vehicles feels unnecessary, don't you think?" She laughed lightly, as though it were already hers to decide. I stood there, biting my tongue so hard I thought it might bleed. Inside, a storm was raging. My son left those cars to me, I thought. They aren't yours to sell. They aren't yours to flaunt. But outwardly, I forced myself to nod politely, to stay silent. Something in me whispered again, "Wait, Margaret. Just wait." And then came the money talk. We were sitting in the living room, the TV on but muted, when she sighed dramatically and said, "Well, at least he left us with some financial cushion. I've already been thinking about how I'll invest our money. Maybe a condo in the city or stocks. Something smart, you know. Our money." That's the phrase she used, as if my son's years of hard work, every late night, every sacrifice, had automatically transferred to her ownership. As if the bank account had her name on it instead of mine. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. But inside, I felt a sharp, almost cruel sense of validation. My son must have known. He must have seen this side of her, the entitlement, the greed that peeked out when no one else was watching. That's why he had done what he did. That's why he had left everything in my name. Every time she spoke, it was less about grief and more about gain. Less about missing him, and more about maneuvering for what she thought she deserved. And every time she let another self-satisfied phrase slip, I sat a little taller, a little stronger, knowing I had made the right choice by staying quiet. Still, it wasn't easy. There were moments where I almost blurted it out, where I wanted to slam the will down on the table and say, "You're wrong. None of this belongs to you." But something kept holding me back. Maybe it was my son's voice, somewhere in the back of my mind, urging me to be patient, because as much as I wanted to defend what was mine, what was his legacy to me, I also wanted her to reveal herself completely. I wanted her mask to slip so far that there was no denying the truth. And oh, did it slip. In less than a week, she went from smug hints to outright claims. She strutted around like she was the new queen of the estate, tossing out plans, decisions, and declarations as though the lawyer had already crowned her. And every time she did, my resolve grew. I knew it was only a matter of time before she went too far, before she tried something so outrageous it would expose her for exactly who she was. And when that moment came, I would be ready. Keeping a secret that large is not as easy as people think. At first, I told myself it was simple. The will had been read, the lawyer had explained everything, and my son's wishes were clear. I was the heir. That was the truth. But truth feels heavy when no one else knows it, when everyone around you assumes something entirely different. Every day, the weight pressed a little harder on my chest. I would wake up in the morning, make my coffee, and glance toward the drawer where I kept the envelope from the lawyer S. office, the one with all the official documents proving everything was in my name. Just knowing it was there made my pulse quicken. What if she found it? What if she accused me of hiding something? It's strange how silence can feel like both a shield and a trap. I wanted to keep the peace, to let her reveal herself without confrontation, but at the same time, the silence made me paranoid. Every knock at the door made me wonder, is this it? Did she find out? And then there was the snooping. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and caught her bent over my writing desk. She jumped the second she heard me, snapping the drawer shut with a little too much force. She plastered on a smile and said, "Oh, I was just looking for a pen." But my heart sank. She wasn't looking for a pen. She was hunting. Her eyes darted around the room as though she expected bank statements or deeds to be lying out in the open, waiting for her greedy hands. From that day forward, I became more cautious. I took the house deed, the car titles, the bank documents, and locked them in a little fireproof box I kept under my bed. I even hid the key inside a sewing kit, tucked between spools of thread she'd never bother with. Each click of the lock felt like a tiny act of survival. But hiding wasn't enough. I had to keep my face calm, my tone steady, even when my insides twisted like a storm. She'd sit across from me at dinner talking about her future plans, and I'd smile politely, nodding along, all while thinking, "You have no idea, not a clue." The hardest part wasn't the secrecy, it was the guilt. At night, when the house was quiet, I would sit alone and whisper to my son, "Did I do the right thing? Should I have told her? Should I share what you left me?" And yet, each time I watched her slink around the house, opening closets she had no business opening, checking mail that wasn't hers, pretending to tidy while her eyes scanned every corner, the answer became clearer. She wasn't grieving. She wasn't honoring his memory. She was circling like a vulture, waiting for me to slip. The secret was heavy, yes, but it was also precious, a final gift from my son, and I was not about to let her snatch it away. Still, the tension built. I knew she wouldn't stop snooping. I knew the longer I kept quiet, the more brazen she would become. And sure enough, within a week, she made her boldest move yet, one that nearly left me speechless. It was exactly 1 week later when she decided to strike. I'll never forget the sound of car doors slamming outside my house, one after another, like a parade. I peeked through the lace curtain and saw not just her, but a convoy of her relatives, brothers, sisters, cousins, even an uncle I'd never laid eyes on before. They were carrying bags, boxes, and one of them even had a cooler. My stomach dropped. She marched right up to my porch like she owned the place, swung the door open without knocking, and said with a big grin, "Well, Margaret, we're here. We're moving in." I stood there frozen for a second, coffee cup still in my hand, watching as these people started filing through my hallway, tracking dirt on the rug, commenting on the size of the rooms like they were touring a hotel. One of her cousins even had the nerve to say, "This'll be perfect for Christmas." She looked at me with that smug face and announced, "Since this was our house, it's only right that I take charge of it now. I'll make sure everything is handled properly." Inside, my heart was pounding, but on the outside, I stayed calm. In fact, I plastered on the sweetest smile I could muster. I let her parade around, opening closets, pointing out where she'd put furniture, even directing her relatives like a general. Finally, when she stood in the middle of the living room with her hands on her hips, declaring, "This will all be mine now," I decided it was time. I put my coffee cup down slowly, walked right up to her, and looked her straight in the eye. My voice was steady when I said, "It won't. Because this house, it isn't yours. It's mine." The room went silent. Her relatives froze, mid-step. One of them even dropped the bag they were holding. She blinked at me, her jaw working like she couldn't process the words. Then she laughed, a high, nervous laugh, and said, "Don't be ridiculous. My husband and I lived here. This is my house now." I shook my head. "Your husband, my son, left this house to me, along with the cars, along with the bank account. Everything is in my name. You don't have a claim." Her face turned red so fast it looked like she might burst. She stammered, That's not possible. He wouldn't do that to me. You're lying." But I wasn't lying, and I didn't even need to raise my voice. The truth hung in the air heavier than any scream could. That's when the fury hit her. She slammed her fist on the table so hard the coffee mug rattled. "If you think you can just take what's rightfully mine, you've got another thing coming. I'll sue you, Margaret. I'll take you to court, and you'll regret ever trying to cross me." Her relatives started murmuring, shifting uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this dramatic showdown. I stood there calm, collected, watching her unravel. No. Inside, I was still shaking, but I knew I had her. She thought she could waltz in, take over, and bully me out of my own home. But she had underestimated me. The threat of a lawsuit hung in the air like a storm cloud, and as she stormed out with her entourage trailing behind her, I knew this battle was far from over. Because when greed meets reality, the fight is only just beginning. The very next day she came back, this time alone, though I could tell from the wild look in her eyes that she had spent the night stewing, rehearsing her lines. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of paperwork when she stormed in. She did not bother with pleasantries. "You think you're clever, Margaret," she spat, slamming her hands on the table. "But that house, those cars, that money, they were mine by marriage. You're just an old woman clinging to what doesn't belong to you." Her voice carried so loudly that within minutes, some of the relatives from the day before started trickling back in, curious about the noise. They hovered in the doorway, whispering, exchanging nervous glances. I pushed my papers aside and looked her square in the face. Calm. Steady. My heart was hammering, but my voice never shook. What belonged to my son was his to give, and he gave it to me. If you want to fight about it, fine, but you'll lose. Her face twisted, and she hissed, "You're lying. He would never cut me out. I'll have my lawyer drag you through court until you have nothing left." And right then, as if fate had scripted it, my phone buzzed. It was my lawyer, checking in about a different matter. I answered on speaker, and she pounced. "Good. Tell him. Tell him she's stealing everything from me." So I did. I calmly explained to my lawyer, within her earshot, exactly what was happening. and bless that man," he chuckled. "Ma'am, everything your son left behind was put in writing." His wishes were crystal clear. "The documents are airtight. She has no legal claim to any of it. In fact, if she pushes this nonsense further, she'll embarrass herself in court." The room went quiet, except for the muffled laughter of a few cousins in the doorway. One even muttered, "Told you she was getting greedy." The daughter-in-law's face drained of color, then flushed beet red. She looked around the room at her so-called supporters, but most of them were shaking their heads, whispering among themselves. The tide had turned. They saw it now. This was not about grief or family or fairness. This was about greed. Pure, ugly greed. She tried one last time to bark orders, to claim she was the widow, the rightful heir, but her voice cracked under the weight of humiliation. The lawyer's laughter, the cousin's smirks, my calm resolve, it all chipped away at her bravado. Finally, with a dramatic sweep of her coat, she shouted, "You'll regret this!" and stormed out the door. The sound of it slamming rattled the frames on the wall, but her power had already evaporated. The relatives lingered awkwardly, a few offering sheepish apologies. One of them even said, "Honestly, Margaret, good for you. She had it coming." Another whispered, "I can't believe she thought she could just take everything." And in that moment, standing in the middle of my kitchen with the truth finally out in the open, I felt something I had not felt since my son's passing. Vindication. My son had known what kind of woman she was. He had protected me, even from beyond the grave. That night, I sat alone in the quiet house, sipping tea. The storm had passed, but the fallout had only just begun, because the truth was out there now, and everyone knew. The fortune was mine, and she had nothing. That night, after the chaos had finally quieted, I sat in my son's favorite armchair. It still carried a trace of his cologne, faint but familiar, like a whisper from the past. I closed my eyes and let myself breathe for the first time in days. And that ass when the truth really sank in. My son knew exactly what he was doing when he left everything to me. At first I had wrestled with guilt. I thought, am I being cruel by keeping this from her? Shouldn't his wife have something? But then I remembered the way she acted during their marriage, always chasing bigger houses, flashier cars, designer handbags. My son had confided in me more than once, saying, "Mom, she doesn't care about building a life with me. She only cares about what I can buy her." He had seen her clearly, even while living with her. And in the end, he made the choice to protect what he worked so hard for, to protect his legacy. And in a way, to protect me. I realized that day in the lawyer's office, when the papers were spread out on the table and his signature was there in black ink, that this wasn't about money. It was about trust. My son trusted me to honor his wishes, to keep safe what he had earned. He didn't trust her, and unfortunately, he was right not to. Sitting there, with the memory of his smile etched into my mind, I felt my guilt start to melt into something else. Pride. Pride that my son had been thoughtful enough, wise enough, to see past the surface. Proud that, even in death, he had taken steps to make sure the people who truly mattered were protected. Of course, it hurt, deeply, to see my daughter-in-law expose herself so shamelessly, to watch her grab at things she had no right to see her relatives show up like vultures. That part still stung. Because when you lose a family member, you hope the rest of the family will come together in grief, not split apart in greed. But betrayal teaches you something important. Boundaries. My son set his boundary by writing that will, and now it was my responsibility to honor it, to carry it forward, no matter who tried to push past it. I whispered into the quiet of the room, almost as if he could hear me. "You did the right thing, son, and I'll make sure it was not in vain." The reflection didn't erase the pain of losing him. Nothing ever could. But it gave me strength. It reminded me that love doesn't always look like soft words or tender gestures. Sometimes love is firm, decisive, protective. And that's exactly what he gave me when he left everything in my care. By the time I finished my tea, I no longer felt like a woman carrying a secret. I felt like a mother carrying out her son's final act of love. And that made all the difference. If there's one thing I learned through all of this, it is that grief has a funny way of shining a spotlight on people, as true selves. Some people show up with casseroles, hugs, and late-night phone calls to make sure you're okay. Others show up with empty suitcases, ready to haul away anything they can grab. And as much as that hurts, it's also a gift, because it clears the fog. You stop guessing who's really with you, and you start seeing the truth plain as day. My daughter-in-law made it clear that she wasn't thinking about my son's memory, or my pain, or even her own healing. She was thinking about keys, titles, and bank balances. That when it hit me, protecting yourself in moments like this isn't selfish. It's survival. My son understood that when he wrote his will. He knew that if he didn't put up a wall, his hard-earned legacy would be chipped away, piece, by someone who didn't care about its meaning. And if I hadn't respected his wishes, if I had handed it all over out of guilt, I would have lost everything. Trust, I realized, isn't something you hand out like candy at Halloween. It's earned, little by little, through actions that prove loyalty and respect. My son earned mine. My daughter-in-law lost hers the moment she tried to bulldoze her way into what was never hers to begin with. And let me tell you, life is too short to keep pretending that greedy people will suddenly turn into saints. They won't. But you can decide where the line is. You can decide who gets in and who stays out. That's not cruelty. That's strength. Now, if you'll allow me a little humor here, because heaven knows we all need a laugh after a story like this, I'll say this. If anyone ever waltzes into your home with a suitcase in one hand, and entitlement in the other, calling it their house, do yourself a favor. Smile, nod, and make sure your lawyer's number is right there on speed dial. Works better than pepper spray, I promise you. At the end of the day, my son left me more than a house, 2 cars, and a bank account. He left me clarity. Clarity about who I can trust. Clarity about what family really means. And clarity about the fact that even in the darkest moments, you can choose to protect your peace. And that lesson? That's worth more than $77 million to me. Thank you for sticking with me through this story. I know it was a long one, but if you've ever been through a messy inheritance, or seen people's true colors come out when money is on the table, then you understand why I had to share it. Stories like these remind us we're not alone, even when family drama makes us feel isolated. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been part of a family feud over money, property, or even something as small as a piece of jewelry? Did someone surprise you, for better or worse, when it came time to divide things up? Share your experience in the comments, because this community is built on real stories, and yours could help someone else feel less alone. And here's my final thought. Sometimes the best-kept secret isn't a recipe passed down from grandma or a quirky family tradition. No, sometimes the best-kept secret is a legal document, one that makes sure the right people are protected and the wrong people are left scratching their heads. Until next time, take care of yourselves, hold tight to the people who truly value you, and remember, boundaries are a gift you give to yourself.